Hello and welcome back to the archive. I'm glad you made it back safely. Today's story is called When He Speaks, You'd Best Listen by Bot99 on Reddit. What's that? I asked, pointing at the strange pillar in the middle of the ship's mess. Huh? Said Crozier, my new captain and self-appointed tour guide. He halted his long and exhaustively detailed explanation of the various functions of the ship's coffee machine and turned around. He smiled. That's Papa Sapo, he replied. I frowned. That didn't explain much. Not much at all. I regarded the column, which spanned from floor to ceiling, with a large dose of bewilderment. It was adorned with a picture of a curious human. The figure was a bald and very rotund man, bedecked in flowing neon robes, seated in a cross-legged position. The lack of hair on his head was more than offset by the lustrous beard that sprouted from his face, so long that it curled into a small pile in his lap. The beard had multicolored beads woven into it, and was that a pipe? The look on the man's face could best be described as cheeky bliss, like he knew a divine secret that no one else was privy to. Religious icon? I ventured. Crozier shrugged. He looks out for us, keeps the ship safe. When Papa Sapo speaks, you'd best listen, explained the captain. Here, let me introduce you. He gently prodded me to stand directly in front of the pillar, staring straight up into Papa Sapo's beneficent face. Papa Sapo, this is Breck. He's one of us now. Recognize him. An uncomfortable silence followed. Was it going to speak? Apparently not. Crozier, seemingly satisfied with the introduction, turned and wandered off. Anyway, let me show you the head. I think you'll find that human toilet technology is years ahead of the rest of the galaxy. His voice faded away as he disappeared down the gangway without looking back to see if I was following. I continued to stare at Papa Sapo, not quite sure what to make of this unexpected turn of events. Humans were well renowned throughout civilized space for their many and varied religions. Papa Sapo looked like an amalgamation of several Terran divinities, but I didn't know enough to guess which ones. Perhaps the crew had manufactured their own religion. That wasn't out of the realms of possibility. Humans were known to be a superstitious bunch. Who was I to say they were wrong? This ship, the Mute Joy, did seem to be unreasonably lucky. In a sector beset by piracy, where the average cargo freighter could expect to encounter pirates several times a year, the Joy had been flying untroubled for over a decade. In that time, they'd never reported any attacks, attempted or successful. It was one of the main reasons I had signed on to be their new electrical engineer, despite the fact that I was the only non-human on the crew. Pleased to meet you, I said to the picture of Papa Sapo. It couldn't hurt to play along, even though I didn't quite believe it would do any good. At least it would help me get along with my new crew. I tore my gaze away and hurried after Captain Crozier. I quickly settled into shipboard life. I was no green newbie, and the Mute Joy wasn't my first ship. I already knew the unwritten rules that existed amongst spacers. Keep your bunk squared away, don't ask too many personal questions, and most importantly, do your job, because nobody else was going to do it for you. Getting along with the Joy's crew was easy. They were more cheerful than most, probably because they'd never had to contest with the violent ordeal of pirate attacks. After a drink or 5, most spacers would tell you a tale of the time they'd been held hostage by pirate raiders, their cargo stolen. Some pirates even dabbled in slavery, selling their captives on the black market, if they didn't just kill them outright to cover their tracks. Spacers that bore the scars of electroshock collars weren't so open about their experiences. Sitting in the mess, eating the mid-shift meal, I examined the faces of my crewmates as they joked and laughed. I could see none of the hardened expressions or jerky eye movements that were the normal sign of deep-seated human trauma. For the most part, they all looked blissfully naive. It was a little worrying, actually. Hey, Breck, did you find out what's causing the shorts in the comms panel on Deck 3? I snapped out of my reverie to see Chief Engineer Okoye looking at me from the other end of the table. Between us, the rest of the crew chatted and joked with each other. Yeah, it was a current leak in the antenna array caused by some faulty shielding. I had to trace it across half the ship, I replied. He smiled and nodded. Yeah, the Joy's a complicated lady. Good work, he said with a nod. I remembered something I'd been meaning to ask. By the way, is there a more up-to-date set of ship schematics? The ones I found on the network seem to be incomplete. What makes you say that? Okoye said warily. While I was tracing the current leak, I found a power cable that's not on the plans. A big one. It seems to be running under the mess, but I couldn't find out where it leads. Everyone at the table went completely silent. They all turned to stare at me intently, more than one with a spoon frozen halfway to their mouth. You didn't mess with it, did you? Asked Okoye, unexplained tension on his face. No, I was just curious. I need up-to-date schematics if I'm going to do my job properly. I don't want to cause any problems because of decisions based on bad info. The table seemed to relax so fast that I could have sworn I heard a collective sigh. What the hell was going on? This is an old ship. A lot of changes made over the years. If you find something not on the plans, you come ask me. Savvy? Said Okoye. He was grinning, but I could see beads of sweat on his forehead. Sure, no problem, I said, not wanting to push the point while I was still new to the ship. The rest of the meal passed uneventfully, but as the group broke up and went back to their assigned posts, I could have sworn I saw a few of them give Papa Sepo's pillar a surreptitious pat as they walked past it. There was definitely something strange about this ship, I decided, and its crew. The life of an electrical engineer on board a freighter isn't always an easy one. More often than not, I spent my days squeezing through hidden crawl spaces, trying to find the source of one electrical problem or another. As an adult Xanti, I was only half the size of a normal human, which made me the perfect size to operate in the tightest spaces aboard a Terran ship. I didn't mind the work, or the confinement. In a way, I relished it. I loved the feeling of complete isolation that came from working in the most remote areas of a ship that was light years away from the nearest settlement. In the dark silence of the ship's innards, I could shut my eyes and pretend that I was the only person in the universe. It wasn't how I wanted to live all the time. I didn't hate being around people, but it was nice sometimes. It allowed me to be my purest self, without the need to put on the persona I used to deal with the outside world, particularly when I was living amongst aliens, so far away from my own kind. It was 5 months after I first shipped out on the Joy that the isolation started to wear a little thin. The problem started when the lights in the mess began flickering at random times. That was enough to raise some eyebrows amongst the rest of the crew. It got worse when the food synthesizer started malfunctioning and refused to output food in any flavor but vinegar. When the coffee machine shut down completely, there was nearly a riot. Everyone turned to me to fix the problem, and I knew that if I wanted to maintain continued employment on the ship, then I'd better not show my face until I did. I was on day 6 of my troubleshooting, trying to find the source of the issue. In those 6 days, I'd spent so much time crawling through the ship's hidden spaces that the experience was rapidly starting to lose its appeal. I'd even taken to sleeping there, rather than wasting time crawling back to my bunk. Every time I thought I'd trace the problem to its source, I'd run into a dead end, both literally and figuratively. Access tunnels that should have, according to the ship's plan, run unbroken down the length of the ship, suddenly ended without warning, blocked by one thing or another. Cables that should have run straight took strange detours for seemingly no reason, or split to run off in different directions. As each setback occurred, I diligently updated the official ship schematic, making sure to correct it when it deviated from the reality I had confirmed with my own eyes. This also proved frustratingly difficult. Updates I had made the day before would somehow be gone the next time I loaded up the plans. Occasionally, I would log on to find the schematics in the system had been completely rolled back to an older version. I raised the issue with Okoye, but he just shrugged it off. Papa Sepo is the only one who truly knows the mute joy, he laughed. That's when I realized something. Most of the undocumented deviations centered around the mess, and one spot in particular, and that's how I came to find myself standing in front of the pillar on the 7th day. I stood there, looking at it suspiciously, unsure what I was expecting to happen. What are you up to, Papa Sepo? I said, more to myself than to the supposed mystical deity. The lights flickered. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a rational sentient. I don't believe in gods and superstition, but I couldn't help but find the timing of the flicker coincidental. I stepped forward until my face was mere inches from the pillar and examined it carefully. What had seemed to be a smooth, unbroken surface was actually covered by a series of very fine cracks. Not the spidery, web-like cracks of stress fractures, but straight and organized ones. It was like Papa Sapo's pillar was covered in hidden compartments. What was this thing? I pushed at a compartment firmly, but nothing happened. There was no reassuring click, no satisfying revelation. My hand plucked a screwdriver from my belt and without even thinking began to rise slowly towards one of the cracks. Perhaps I could jimmy it open. "Breck, what are you doing?" Crozier was standing in the doorway, arms folded across his chest. I dropped my hand quickly, embarrassed to have been caught in the act of messing with something the crew obviously found to be sacred. "What is this thing really?" I asked. "It looks like it has secret compartments in it, yet it's not on any of the ship's schematics, and there's all sorts of strange weirdness centered right on it." Crozier ignored my question as he crossed the mess to stand in front of me. "Have you fixed the issues we've been having?" he asked pointedly, shifting the conversation away from the pillar and its eccentricities. The lights flickered again. "Damn it, Breck, you need to find out what's going on and fix it." He dropped his normally jovial demeanor, but his voice wasn't aggressive. He sounded more worried than anything. "I'm trying," I cried defensively, "but nothing about this ship makes any damn sense. I've never seen anything like it. I feel like I'm going crazy." He put his hands out in a placating gesture. Now, it's not that bad. I'm sure there's a rational explanation. This is an old ship. It's bound to have some foibles you haven't come across before. Have you checked with Okoye? Maybe he can help you." I felt my frustration rising. "Maybe I should ask him," I said, pointing at the picture of Papa Sapo. "What's your deal, Papa Sapo? Huh? What are you hiding?" We both stared at the pillar for a moment. I half expected the lights to flicker again just to taunt me. Crozier turned back towards me and opened his mouth to say something. The lights turned red. A strange wailing filled the ship. The emergency alarm. "What's going on now?" I asked. Fear was etched across the captain's face. He swallowed uncomfortably before answering. "Pirates." I wish I could tell you that we fought them off, that we blasted them out of space with torpedoes and went on our merry way, but I can't. We were just a cargo freighter. We didn't have many weapons, just a few point defense lasers that were only good against micrometeorites. We couldn't outrun them either. The Joy was designed for cargo capacity and fuel efficiency, not acceleration. The small pirate raider was on us before we knew it. Its dark and menacing form, the hull all sharp edges and weapons ports, appeared out of the blackness of space and latched on to the side of the mute Joy, right over the emergency airlock. In no time at all, they had hacked our security protocols and forced it open. Then they were on board. 4 big quadrupedal arachnacs stormed through the inner airlock door, wearing black suits of power armor and brandishing ugly laser rifles. A buzzing electronic voice boomed from the leader, the only one wearing a translator. "Surrender. Obey. Resistance punished." The Joys, unlike most freighters, didn't have an arms locker, a symptom of their complacency, I thought cynically, brought about by years of blissful ignorance as to the true nature of the galaxy. There was no point resisting. We had no weapons with which to fight back. The pirates quickly herded us all into the mess, the only room on the ship big enough to hold us all, save for the cargo hold, which was currently chock full of mining machinery and consumables destined for the colony planet Kappa 6. Tables were quickly thrown aside, the pirates' power armor allowing them to simply tear out the bolts that secured them to the deck. With rough prods and gestures, the crew was forced down to our knees in the center of the room, in front of the pillar, from which Papa Sapo watched with smiling indifference. The 8 of us huddled close together, hands in the air in submission. The 4 arachnacs stood before us, rifles at the ready. "Secret deduced. Mute Joy long unspoilt. Riches suspected. What? Where?" I glanced at Crozier, who was kneeling next to me, with panic in my eyes. "All we have is what's in the cargo hold, and our own meager possessions," the captain said. "If we had riches, do you think we'd be wasting our time lugging freight to dirt-poor mining colonies?" The leader sprang forward and smashed Crozier in the face with his gloved fist. There was a sickening crunch. Blood immediately began flowing freely from the captain's broken nose. "Lies probable. No matter. Profits certain." It was then that I noticed that each pirate had several shock collars dangling from clips on their power suits. "They're slavers!" I shouted. My legs tensed as I prepared to spring to my feet. It was better to die fighting than to be sold into cruel servitude. The leader's head snapped towards me, his cruel eyes boring into me, and all strength fled my body. I wasn't brave enough for this. "Why did I sign on with you naive idiots?" I hissed at Crozier. "Where's your Papa Sapo now? Does he care that we're all going to die as slaves in some cesspit?" "No resistance, except fate." The pirate leader stepped forward again, now holding a shock collar, and grabbed me by the neck. I struggled desperately, making it difficult for him to secure the shock collar's clasp. "No struggled. Damaged slave, low profit." I could sense his patience wearing thin. His grip tightened, cutting off my ability to breathe. "Perhaps I could assist," interjected Crozier. "Allow me to say a prayer for my crew to help calm them down. I'd hate for you to damage us." He wiped blood from his lower face with his sleeve. "More than you already have." The pirate let me go, and I slumped back to my knees, gasping for air. He stepped backwards to stand in line with his compatriots. "Fine, quickly, then no struggle." Crozier turned to look at the rest of the captive crew behind us. He put his hands together in a gesture of prayer and nodded at them. They quickly did the same, bowing their heads so low they were nearly touching the deck. "Hear me, Papa Sapo. It is I, your loyal initiate. Life has seen fit to set before us a great challenge, a potentially lethal challenge. In our hour of need, what response will you give us?" There was something strange about Crozier's prayer. He seemed to be putting more emphasis on certain words. It was very slight, and would have only been perceptible to someone who had spent substantial time in his company. Given the cheap translation software the pirates were using, I highly doubted they noticed it at all. "Papa Sapo, we beseech thee, lend us your aid, for we are mere mortals, unjust targets for the harsh blows of life. Protect this child." He reached out with one hand and placed it gently on the back of my head. I could see the pirates growing impatient. "From evil, we bow before you, O Great One." He slowly pushed my head down towards the deck, while also lowering his own. The pirates started to step forward, collars in hand. "Give us your wisdom. Code word, speak." The lights flickered and went out. A thunderous roar split the air, so loud it did indeed sound like the voice of a god. I screwed my eyes closed and held my breath. Then the roar stopped, and there was silence. The lights came back on, and I opened my eyes. Everything was red. In front of me were 4 stinking piles of meat, the pulped remains of our tormentors. I turned around to Crozier and the rest of the crew. I could see that they were laughing and crying with joy, hugging each other and sobbing with relief, but I couldn't hear a thing. It was as if somebody had flicked a switch and removed all sound from the world. I watched them rejoice, still stunned by what had transpired. Okoye reached out and pulled me into the group hug with the others. As I was drawn into the crush of bodies, I had no choice but to look up. I saw Papa Sapo smiling down on us. It was only later, when they showed me a video of the event, after a significant cleanup effort, that I fully understood what had happened. In the grainy green tones of the night vision camera, I saw the pillar with us prostrate before it. The pirates lined up, facing us. 4 compartments on the face of the pillar exploded open on spring-loaded hinges. Before the covers had even fully retracted, gun barrels erupted from their new openings. Each barrel jerked quickly as it locked onto its chosen target, then spewed forth a near-solid stream of tiny projectiles that tore into the pirates, who were caught completely unawares. Power armor seemed to melt as the barrage of flechettes chewed it away, then ate into the flesh underneath. The pirates almost seemed to explode under the onslaught, gore flying everywhere. The whole crew, all gathered around the screen, winced and let out a collective groan at the sight. Crozier pointed at the stream of projectiles. "We use flechettes instead of bullets. They're small, so there's less chance of them putting a hole in the hull if some miss the target." I regarded the man with skepticism. "Why didn't you tell me about this? I've been going nuts trying to figure out what's going on," I said. Okoye laughed and clapped me on the back. "We had to be sure we could trust you. Now you've experienced the mute joy. You're one of us now, little man." Crozier absent-mindedly picked chunks out of his beard as he watched the replay again. Papa Sapo only works if he's a secret, he said. He needs the element of surprise. That's why we've never reported any attacks to authorities. There'd be too many questions about how we survived. It's also why we gave you such a hard time about fixing those electrical problems. Papa Sapo drinks a lot of juice. That made obvious sense, but I still wasn't thrilled to have been left out of the loop. My ears were still ringing from the noise. I hoped I didn't have permanent hearing damage. Then something else occurred to me. Why do you call it Papa Sapo? Crozier smiled. That's easy. Papa, because he watches over us like a father. And Sapo, Shipboard Anti-Piracy Ordinance. I continued to serve on the Mute Joy for many years, and I heard Papa Sapo's roar several more times, but always lived to tell the tale. Whenever a new member joined our crew, I, like the rest of the crew, drove one lesson into their heads above all others. When Papa Sapo speaks, you'd best listen. Thanks for stopping by and listening to my story. Take a subscription. It'll lead you back here when I'm ready to read another. And don't forget to spread the word so others can find the archive. I look forward to seeing you again.